A Country Divided: The Impact of Partisan Politics on Higher Education Governance. Hi, I'm Tammy DeMel, and I'm here to talk to you about how partisan politics is impacting higher education. But first, a little bit about me. Currently, I'm the Assistant Vice President for Communications at Kennesaw State University. Kennesaw State is a comprehensive university and part of the University System of Georgia. I've worked at KSU for 8 years. Prior to Kennesaw State, I spent 7 years at Georgia State as Associate Director for Marketing and Communications for the J. Mack Robinson College of Business. Prior to Georgia State, I was in the corporate world. I began my career in New York working in publishing and then moved on to working in PR agencies. I left New York City and moved down to Atlanta, I began to work at Turner Broadcasting. But for the past 15 years, my career has been in higher education, and currently I have no plans of leaving it. As the Assistant Vice President for Communications, I'm responsible for all media relations, crisis communication, and reputation management, as well as executive and internal communications for the university. I currently serve as a member of the President's Advisory Council, and I'm also involved in other campus committees. KSU has gone through some changes in recent years, including the consolidation with Southern Polytechnic State University, as well as changes in leadership. As of now, I plan to continue in my role in communications, but beyond that, we'll see how things play out over the next year or so. In my role at Kennesaw State, I handle a lot of issues. One of the more recent issues that I was involved in was the transition of our new president, Sam Olens. Sam had no higher education experience, and his appointment was controversial as there was no search. To complicate matters, Mr. Olens was viewed by the campus community as someone who was politically partisan, and many on campus saw him as a threat to LGBT rights, since as the state's Attorney General, he defended Georgia's ban on gay marriage. To say that the KSU campus community didn't roll out the red carpet for its new president would be an understatement. But this situation gave me a front row seat to how partisan politics is playing out across our nation's campuses. The appointment of Mr. Olens was viewed as a political favor by many. Rumors swirled about just how the appointment came to be. Was this his own doing? Did he make it known that he wanted the position? Did he decide that after he decided that he would not run for governor, or was he pushed from the governor's race? Regardless of the reason, and taking Mr. Olens out of the picture, the appointment was obviously political, and though not against USG policy, brought the issue of higher education governance and partisan politics to the front steps of Kennesaw State. But what happened at KSU is not an anomaly. It's happening in one form or another on college campuses across the country, and it seems to stem from the idea that higher education, particularly public higher education, is failing. Like most things, the criticism about higher education can be traced to two things: power and money. A recent documentary called Starving the Beast tells the story about the systematic defunding of higher education over the past 35 years and how conservative think tank leaders and politicians have worked to change the public view of higher education as a private good versus a public right, and how those in academia are responsible for the problems. Here's a trailer from the movie which I found quite disturbing.
Now there's a debate. There's a debate going on.
The de-investment of higher education was occurring across the country.
On one side, you have Bobby Jindal and a man named Grover Norquist.
I offer people a taxpayer protection pledge.
He came up with an idea to persuade politicians to sign a pledge that said that they would never vote to raise taxes.
I will not raise your taxes.
Grover Norquist is a grifter.
You starve the government by reducing tax revenue.
They're designing the system to fail. You make sure that a public institution cannot perform its duties, and then you blame it for failing to live up to its goals and performing its duties.
I think we all agree now college costs too much, delivers too little, and it has to change.
Before any of our young people take out student loans, that school has to tell you how much you can expect to make.
We need people who come to the federal government and ask for money to pursue something that has some demand in the economy.
These reformers decided that universities were the problem.
And they say that education is a commodity.
they've started a fervent political campaign under this mistaken guise that students are consumers rather than students and future citizens.
You can commoditize it, you can charge for it. It's just another thing out there. It's a barrel of oil, it's an ounce of gold, it's a stock, it's anything.
The existing system creates barriers to entry that limit competition.
There's $150 billion in federal financial aid that is on the line.
It's created a very toxic ideology.
The fallout continues tonight over the ousting of University of Virginia President Teresa Sullivan.
Tom Ross is the president of the UNC system. He was shoved out by the UNC Board of Governors.
Mike McKinney, who was the chancellor of the Texas A&M system at the time, was pushed out.
Some politicians became at odds when powers refused to implement a series of reforms that make the university more like a business.
The governor is calling his plan Act 10 for the UW and says he believes they can handle the $300 million cut he's proposed.
Because of our reforms today, there is no seniority or tenure in our state.
For them, criticizing the government is political. That definition of political means, therefore, it can't be uttered by a university professor. And think of the vision of the First Amendment, free speech, and academic freedom that's left. Professors cannot criticize the government.
Any institution hates to admit that it has a problem. They all want to say, look, we're just like we were before, everything is fine, and that would be a lie, because we have been hurt.
If you want your son or daughter to get a great education, you better be looking at MIT or Stanford or ones of great private institutions. It's a tragedy, really.
In a Washington Post article, Partisan Politics is Undermining the Public Ivies, it was noted that according to the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities, states have slashed per-student spending at public colleges and universities by 17% since the Great Recession, while tuition has shot up by a third. Meanwhile, the same elected officials who are slashing aid are chastising and in many cases forbidding any tuition increases that might compensate for those cuts. In the article, the author discusses the attacks on the higher education system by the same state officials. He writes, and I quote, "Now having made incompatible promises to slash funding and freeze tuition, politicians have set aside leadership and chosen the course of attack instead. They say the university is, quote, out of touch, its business model, quote, broken." In the article, the author points to one of the most alarming facts, which is that those who are lobbying the attacks are increasingly identified by their partisan labels. In Structuring Injustices, Partisan Politics in the Making and Unmaking of James Madison University's Equal Opportunity Policy, the authors present a situation at James Madison University in Virginia, whereby elected state officials across party lines impacted the rights of LGBT students. In the case outlined, public institutions in Virginia were subjected to the whims of the ruling party as it related to including language about sexual orientation and its equal rights policies, whereby under Republican control, schools were forbidden to include sexual orientation in their equal rights protection policies, and when power changed hands and the Democrats were in power, schools were able to reinstate their policy. What makes this all so interesting and relevant to the discussion about the impact of partisanship on higher education governance is how Virginia's higher education governance works. According to the study, each public institution of higher education has its own Board of Visitors, a policy-making body whose 15 voting members are appointed by the governor to a 4-year term. Each year, 5 voting members, 1/3 of the Board of Visitors, rotate off, such that by the second year of a governor's term, a majority, 2/3, of voting Board of Visitors members are that person's appointees, and by the 3rd year, all voting members are the sitting governor's appointees. Board of Visitors in Virginia are also invested with the authority to approve or reject the creation of new majors and are the final step in approving or rejecting recommendations for faculty tenure and promotion decisions. So what does this tell us? Well, it's never a good idea to generalize, but it would appear that all of this tells a story about how partisan politics has and is continuing to impact the direction of higher education. In Governance for a New Era, the authors make the argument that boards should be appointed by state governors because ultimately they are the ones that bear the responsibility. In theory, this sounds like a workable solution. But ask yourself, at a time when our country is so deeply divided and our politicians are governing along partisan lines, do we really believe this is the best approach? And while faculty members across the country seem to be at odds and in many cases blamed for what ails higher education, can we really blame them for fighting so hard for what they believe? Thank you.